Welcome to Automation Annuity with Magic Oranges. I'm the author, Don Soards, and we're looking at the cover page of the book. There's an icon of the production parabola. It shows that we start off in a seller's market, go up to the top of the parabola. There's an X marking we are here, and we're going down the buyer's market side of the parabola now. We went on the upside of the production parabola from 1800 to the year 2000. In the 20th century, the saying was, progress is our most important product. And now in the 21st century, we've got a new saying. Who do these corporations think is going to buy their stuff after they lay us all off? The two essential inputs for economic output. In any economy, production is a result of two primary inputs: production capacity, what can be made, and demand, who is willing and able to buy. While technology and investment can dramatically increase production capacity, demand is intimately tied to people's incomes, which are typically earned through jobs. When workers are replaced by machines and not given alternative sources of income, demand shrinks. If this happens across a wide enough segment of society, production must eventually shrink to match. Goods will pile up on shelves, stores will close, businesses will fail. Thus, the paradox of automation is born. The more we automate, the more we undermine the consumer base. Production as a mathematical model. To better understand this dynamic, we can express total production mathematically. Production is equal to demand times production capacity. Demand is the fraction of humans H in the labor force, the ones earning and spending. Production capacity is the combination of work done by humans plus machines. This work is done by those humans with a job, H. The remaining work is done by machines, M, with an efficiency, E. This gives us the following equation for total national production. Production is equal to H times the quantity, H plus EM. Here's a table for a machine efficiency of 20 times human labor. Now, back in 1800, the percent of humans working, well, all the work was done by people back then. They had hand tools and they had a horse with a plow. So the machines weren't doing anything at that time. And in this case, the demand is the full labor force, and the production capacity, well, it's the 1.0 for the people working, and the machine is 0, so it's just 1.0. And if we multiply the demand times the production capacity, that's 1 times 1. And we get a total national production of 1.0 if we have only people working. And that's the first condition we've analyzed. Now, suppose that we find a way to take 10% of the people out of the workforce and give that work to machines. What happens to our production then? Well, we got 90% people working and 10% of that's the machine work that's we're giving to that now. So the demand is 0.9, it's dropped a little, but the production capacity has really soared. We have 0.9 for the people, and the term EM, well, it's 20 for the efficiency of machines times 0.1, that's 2, plus the 0.9, so that's 2.9, times the demand of 0.9, and then we get a total national production of 2.61. Boy, that's heady stuff. Can you imagine when they first got the machines in there doing things? You know, here they've gone on added 161% to their national output. Now, suppose we're able to go down to 80% people and 20% machines. Well, demand drops to 0.8, production soars to 4.8, and then we get a national production of 3.84. You know, that is just amazing. They must have thought the sky was the limit. At 70/30, the total production's 4.69. Now it's not going up quite as fast. 60/40, it goes up to 5.16, and then it peaks at 5.63% of humans working, just a little over 50%, and we reach maximum production, 5.2555. Now let's go down to 40/60. What happens if we go down that low? Well, the demand shrinks to an anemic 0.4, but the production soars to 12.4. I mean, this is 12 times what they were doing out in the fields back in 1800. But the total national production is the multiple of the 0.4 and the 12.4, and now it starts dropping, 4.96. If we go to 30% people and the machines are doing 70% of all the work, the demand drops way down to 0.3. Production's really high, but our production capacity is really high at 14.3. But our total production drops some more down to 4.29. At 2080, 20% humans working and machines doing 80% of the work. Our national production drops to 3.24. At 1090, well, with the demand's only 0.1, nobody's got any money to buy anything. Hardly anybody's employed. And so they can't buy it no matter how high the production is. And the production drops to 1.81. And then finally, if the machines are doing it all, sounds like utopia, but 0 times 20 is 0. Nobody's got any money to buy anything. And we'll be rioting long before then because there'll be too many starving people. The bold numbers are high demand and low production capacity. The top half of this table is the seller's market. High demand means too many dollars, and the italicized numbers are low demand and low production capacity. And you can see we've got relatively low production capacity compared to what we eventually do. So in a seller's market, they have too many dollars chasing too few goods. It isn't that the people were rich. They were not. It's just that the production hadn't really geared up as high as it could go. Then we reach the peak of the production parabola with maximum production, and you can see that we have the italicized numbers are the low demand. The machines are doing most of the work, but the blue numbers are the high production capacity. And yeah, with the machines doing all the work, seems like we'd be in great shape, but it just doesn't work that way. And we start having too few people to buy the products. And we're in a buyer's market. A buyer's market is when there's too few dollars chasing too many goods. And this all happens because technology keeps improving all the time, and that keeps raising production capacity. And it seems like a good thing, but when it takes too many jobs away, then we start having problems with our national production. In our high employment, high demand periods, technology improves production capacity, and the multiple of high demand and advancing technology enhances our standard of living, higher production. After reaching the peak production, technology keeps improving our production capacity, but the multiple of stronger technology multiplied by weaker demand, lower employment, gives us lower production and a lower standard of living. Oops. Next, we have a graph of the production parabola with a machine efficiency of 20 times human labor. There's the graph, and you can see on the vertical axis, this is the national labor force years of production. So you start off and they have 1 year of human production, and it goes up to a little over 5 years of human production. It's the seller's market on the left, and those numbers on the graph are the ones we just computed, the 1, the 2.61, 3.84, and so forth. We reach the top, and at the bottom axis is a percent of labor force employed. So as we get pretty close there to 50%, we hit the peak, and then after that, it's downhill. The seller's market side of the production parabola is high demand and low production capacity. The buyer's market side shows technology increasing production capacity, but lowering demand so much that customers can't purchase all we could make. Production has to be cut back to avoid unsold merchandise. Production cuts usually mean laying off workers, which further lowers consumer demand, and we're living that now. Advantages of living in a buyer's market using progress dollars to make up wages lost to automation. Entering the buyer's market is good because we can now distribute an automation annuity to every adult U.S. citizen from a non-taxpayer pot of money, progress dollars, to increase demand enough to make up for wages lost to automation. Let's say that again. We can now distribute an automation annuity to every adult U.S. citizen, age 18 and over, from a non-taxpayer pot of money, progress dollars, to increase demand enough to make up for wages lost to automation. As our technology grows, the progress dollar automation annuity grows over time. A historical case, agriculture and industrialization. In 1800, over 70% of the U.S. population worked in agriculture. By 2020, that number had fallen under 2%. This transformation was driven by machines. Tractors, combine harvesters, irrigation systems, and food processing equipment replaced millions of laborers. From a production standpoint, this was a triumph. One farmer now feeds hundreds of people. But those displaced had to find work in other sectors, manufacturing and later services. The economy absorbed them. Now with AI and robotics, automation is displacing workers across all sectors. But unlike the previous eras, there are fewer new sectors left to absorb the displaced workers. As machines take over customer service, logistics, manufacturing, and even medicine and law, the core question arises, where will the displaced workers go? Peak production and the shape of the parabola. If we plot total production as a function of human employment and machine efficiency E, we get a parabola. At first, automation raises productivity. Businesses benefit from cost savings. Consumers enjoy lower prices, GDP grows. But this rise is not endless. Eventually, the decline in human jobs reduces total demand so much that overall production begins to fall. Despite higher production capacity, businesses cut output to avoid inventory surplus. This tipping point, where demand no longer sustains maximum production, is the peak of the production parabola. Beyond it, every new efficiency gain must be weighed against the consumer demand it destroys. Yeah, every labor-saving device since the year 2000 has really been a nail in our economic coffin. The present moment, a buyer's market with too little demand. In today's economy, we are past the peak. We are on the right side of the parabola. We can produce more than ever, but demand is too weak to absorb it all. Signs are everywhere. Retail closures, stagnant wages, widespread underemployment, and rising inequality. Government data shows that wealth continues to concentrate at the top, while the middle and lower classes struggle to maintain basic economic security. This is the defining challenge of modern capitalism. Without income, consumers cannot consume, and without consumption, businesses cannot survive, regardless of how efficient they are. Progress dollars and the automation annuity, a sustainable fix. The solution is to ensure that all citizens have enough income to maintain demand, even if they are no longer employed in traditional jobs. Enter progress dollars, money created by the government, not through taxation or debt, but as a direct stimulus to individual citizens, paid monthly as an automation annuity. These funds are designed to replace the wages lost to automation. Unlike universal basic income proposals that pick arbitrary dollar amounts, the automation annuity is tied to actual economic conditions. It increases as technology displaces more workers. It pauses when demand pull inflation rises. It's responsive and grounded in economic reality. In this system, automation becomes a net benefit to all, lifting productivity and prosperity without leaving anyone behind. Which side of the production parabola are we on? First, we will look at the number of workers employed in full-time equivalents. Next, we will examine the effect of automation on wage suppression. The combination of these two will determine if the national demand has dropped below 50%, placing us in the buyer's side of the production parabola. Labor force participation and wages have fallen below peak efficiency. The production parabola shows that peak national production occurs when just over 50% of the labor force is fully employed. According to pre-COVID data from October 2017, the U.S. labor force participation rate was at 62.7%. When adjusted for part-time workers and discouraged job seekers, the actual number falls closer to 53.7%. An analysis of wage suppression due to automation estimates that wages were suppressed 13 to 20% between 2000 and 2017. So national demand is clearly well below the 50% full-time level and places us well into the buyer's side of the production parabola. And there you can see the top. The reason we use the year 2000 as the top of the production parabola. To the left is the seller's market side, and to the right is the buyer's market side. We're doing a lot of hiring on the seller's market side, and we're doing a lot of laying off on the buyer's market side. Declining velocity of money. The velocity of money measures how quickly money circulates in the economy. In 2000, each dollar was spent about 2.1 times per year. By 2017, that figure had dropped to around 1.4. This drop indicates economic fear. When people lose confidence, they spend less, save more, and hoard what little they have. This is a clear sign of buyer's market behavior. There are goods on shelves, but consumers are too cash-strapped or too uncertain to buy them. Sluggish GDP growth since 2006. The GDP is real gross domestic product, a measure of national output. It began declining in 2006 and has remained weak for over a decade in spite of record deficit spending. The economy is not growing at a pace consistent with past recovery periods, and this trend suggests that consumer demand has eroded substantially. Despite having the production technology, we simply aren't producing as much because too few consumers can afford to buy. And the reason for the lag between 2000, when the labor force dropped, and 2006 is it takes a little while for companies to realize that we have had a decrease in the demand. This graph produced by ShadowStats is correctly adjusted for inflation. ShadowStats is a company that corrects the consumer price index information. In 1980, just a little bit after that, in the early 80s, they went ahead and had such high housing prices it made the incumbent politicians look bad. And so instead of using the actual price of housing, they came up with another methodology. But that methodology understates inflation by about 2% a year every year, and it's a cumulative effect. So we'll look at what the official numbers are, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at ShadowStats, which has correct numbers. From 2000 onward, we enter the buyer's side of the production parabola and experience a decline in our national GDP growth in spite of running massive national debt to prop up our economy. That massive national debt is, it was 5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, and in 2000, and now it's 37 trillion. So it's gone up 35 trillion. In this first quarter of the 21st century, we have increased the national debt 7 times over. So that is truly a massive national debt just to prop up our economy. And what do we have to show for it? Well, take a look at that blue line since 2000. It's basically hovering right around zero. So we really haven't had any big GDP push. You think we would for all the money we spent. And we sure have incurred a big debt doing this thing. That's the advantage of the automation annuity. It comes from a non-debt pool of money, progress dollars. Well, this is a sure sign we're in on the buyer's market side of the production parabola. It's highly deflationary on the buyer's market side. Misleading unemployment statistics. Official unemployment figures, such as the U3 rate reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, have long painted a rosier picture than reality. These figures exclude those who have been out of work for over a year and given up. Shadowstats.com, which includes discouraged workers, reports that the real unemployment rate has hovered around 22% since 2010. That's another sign we're in a buyer's market. You know, they're getting rid of the people and they're getting replaced by the machines. Automation no longer creates enough jobs. Historically, automation led to new job creation in emerging industries. During the early industrial revolution, machines created more jobs than they destroyed. However, as of the 21st century, that's no longer the case. Graphical data from 1800 to 2000 shows a dramatic slowdown in job creation. Machines now build machines. AI platforms like ChatGPT can code, write, and design, eliminating even high-skilled positions. Automation is expanding, but job creation is not keeping pace. I spent 2 months doing this chart, poring over census data. And over there on the left, that's the percent of jobs created during the 50-year period. And starting off in 1800 with manufacturing, they were making steel, and wow, 16%. That's a pretty heavy new type of job creation. And that's the percent of the workforce that got to go into those new jobs. Then we had the steel, we built the railroads, and that was an increase in the people that took those new jobs of 9.4% of the entire workforce. And then automobiles from 1900 to 1950, well, 11% of the workforce went up there to Detroit and made the automobiles. And then coming into around 1970, it dropped to 6.8%. Those were the mainframe computers, and we had the moon rocket, the space program. And then we had the internet and coming in, but we're down to 4.4%. And then a little bit over 2000, it's 3.1. To be considered a new job, it has to be created within the last 50 years. And I'd venture to say, from my experience looking at those stats, that if by the time this curve's extended out to 2050, it'll likely be at around 1%. There just aren't that many new types of jobs being created that require a lot of people in them. I remember when we were younger, we said, oh, well, the people will build, robots are doing it, but somebody will have to build the robots. Well, after a while, we began to realize it wasn't the people that would build the robots. They're just a machine. They'll have other robots building the robots. Record low marriage and birth rates. Economic conditions affect life decisions. In the Great Depression, marriage rates fell to historic lows. Today, they are even lower. Many young adults delay marriage or forgo it entirely due to financial insecurity. First-time homebuyer age has increased from 28 in 1980 to 38 in 2025. The middle class can no longer afford to reproduce itself, a sign of economic regression and despair. This breakdown in household formation is a symptom of buyer's market distress. Persistently low interest rates. In seller's market, interest rates are high due to investment competition. In a buyer's market, low consumer demand discourages business lending. The result, persistently low interest rates. The low cost of borrowing suggests that a surplus of capital and a shortage of places to put it profitably. That is, we have the money, but not the demand to justify investments. Asset prices have stalled, and also inflation has stalled. Before the COVID pandemic, inflation remained stubbornly below the Federal Reserve's 2% target. Asset appreciation slowed. Deflation risk grew. This environment is not just low inflation, it's a warning sign. Businesses aren't investing, consumers aren't spending, and prices reflect oversupply rather than booming demand. Job search difficulty and age discrimination. Jobs are harder to find, especially for older workers. And boy, those young college graduates aren't doing too good either. People over 50 report greater difficulty securing meaningful employment. Many industries view mid-career professionals as too expensive or outdated, leading to layoffs or forced early retirements. In a thriving economy, experience is valued. In a buyer's market, it's sidelined. Economic mobility has collapsed. One of the pillars of the American dream is that each generation does better than the last. Data shows this is no longer true. Those born in 1940 had a 90% chance of out-earning their parents by age 30. For those born in 1984, that figure is only 50%. The younger generation is stagnating, despite being better educated, more productive, and more connected than any generation in history. We're in a buyer's market, folks. Oh, this one's sad. Consumers are spending their savings. Since the late 1990s, the bottom 90% of Americans have saved less and spent more. By 2007, they were dipping into savings just to survive. This negative savings trend, a full decade before the Great Recession that happened in 2008, reveals a long-term erosion of financial stability. It indicates desperation, not prosperity. It aligns perfectly with the buyer's market trajectory. The bottom 90% massively dissaved in the decade preceding the crisis, and you can see there around 1997 that the savings rate went negative. That means people are dipping into their savings. They're just trying to put food on the table and get needed medical care. Yeah, that's a sign of the buyer's market coming in. The economic landscape has flipped. We moved from a world of optimism and opportunity to one of retrenchment and fear. Consider this comparison. Okay, over on the left, we've got seller's market. That side is that's before the year 2000 back. And then we have the buyer's market side over on the right. During the seller's market years, we had an increasing middle class, the American dream, boy. Now we've had a declining middle class. About half of them, what was the middle class, are in danger of moving into the poor class. America's a great nation. I grew up believing that. Well, Canada won twice with the slogan, "Make America Great Again." Education is a good investment. There was no question back then about that. Now we've got massive student debt without jobs. Used to be invest in production to profit. Oh yeah, everybody was building the machines bigger and waiting for more demand, and now demand is decreasing. Cash is king. Businesses grew sales. Boy, that was the emphasis. Now companies cut costs, all the layoffs we see all the time in the papers and the headlines. Full-time jobs. When I was growing up, I hardly knew anybody that had a part-time job except for a student. And now there's a lot of part-time jobs and discouraged workers. Good job benefits. Oh yeah, now we have declining benefits. Funded retirements. Yeah, corporations had their own retirement programs. And now we have the 401k programs. And those things have just turned out to be a real dud for most people. What happens is they get unemployed for a while and then have to dip into their retirement to kind of make ends meet. And then they don't have much left when it's time to retire. Back then they were hiring. And now there's just, one string of layoffs after another. Back then they wanted things like cable TV. And now millions have cut the cord in an effort to save costs. Large to moderate inflation. Oh, it was huge back then. Now we're getting deflation or meager inflation because of incredible amounts of spending, adding 32 trillion in debt in just a quarter of a century. Individual families having their own home. And now we have multi-generational families in one home. Yeah, the young folks just can't afford to go out there and find a job that makes enough to even get an apartment. Rising salaries, they have what's called a jobless recovery. The stock market recovers, but the people don't. High velocity of money, it gets spent often. You've seen the low velocity of money chart. Low credit card debt. And now we have a outrageously high credit card debt as a national number. It's getting up there. Back then we had a lot of hope, and now there's a lot more fear for the future. The symptoms are clear. We have crossed the midpoint of the production parabola. Yeah, we're solidly in the buyer's market now. Please go to part 2 of 4 to see sections 3, 4, and 5.